Today's movie is the 2010 Easy A starring Emma Stone. It's a retelling of The Scarlet Letter, but it also makes significant mention of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn and is a pastiche of 1980s John Hughes-style rom-coms with allusions to Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Can't Buy Me Love. Easy A is about Olive Pendergast, played by Stone, and is narrated through a framing device of a vlog, a direct-to-screen monologue that Olive is giving with flashbacks of her story.
Let the record show that I, Olive Pendergast, being of sound mind and, average breast size, swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Olive is a 16-year-old who doesn't want to go away with her best friend's family for the weekend. She lies to that friend, Rhiannon, saying she can't go, she's got a date, but instead spends the weekend with her super fun parents, played by Stanley Tucci and Patricia Clarkson, her brother, and her dog. When Rhiannon pumps Olive for details about her fake date on Monday morning, Olive lets Rhiannon think that she lost her virginity.
We did it. Yes! Finally! Now you're a super slut like me.
I don't think letting Peter Headland motorboat you behind a Bed Bath & Beyond really makes you a super slut.
There were a lot of people walking past, okay? Someone could have easily seen.
Mm-hmm.
The rumor spreads, and the Christian group on campus, led by Amanda Bynes, starts viciously bullying Olive for her fake promiscuity.
I just hope for your sake you at least had the good sense to use protection.
Why? Your parents didn't.
You're going to hell.
Olive tells the truth to her friend Brandon, who is also being bullied at school, although more brutally for being gay. So Brandon asks Olive for a favor. While she's in the business of pretending to have sex, will she please pretend to have sex with him so that people will think he's straight and leave him alone? Olive agrees, but things escalate from there. Nerds all around the school start paying Olive in gift cards for the right to lie about sexual exploits with her. But other kids at the school who believe Olive is really having sex with all of these guys are having a big negative reaction to the news. The sex shaming is so shocking and confusing to Olive that she becomes confrontational about it. She starts dressing in bustiers and high heels, and she sews a scarlet A onto all of her clothes as an allusion to the novel The Scarlet Letter, which they are reading in English class. The Scarlet Letter is an 1850 American classic by Nathaniel Hawthorne, assigned reading for just about every American child in the 10th or 11th grade. It is about a woman, Hester Prynne, who has a baby out of wedlock and is scorned with a scarlet A on her chest as punishment. It turns out it is the minister who is publicly rebuking her who's the father. There's prison, a husband who was presumed dead, returned from sea, a witchy daughter. I don't know. I haven't read it since the 10th grade, and I can't remember if I read it or the Cliffs Notes. But in the 2010s, this was considered essential reading for teenagers for some reason. All is going relatively fine with Olive's new look until Olive gets asked out by a guy at school and she agrees to go, thinking it's a date. Instead, rumors through the grapevine have distorted, as they do, and this guy thinks that he is actually going to be able to pay Olive for sex. The date ends in misery and mortification. Olive gets a ride home from a waiter at the restaurant who also happens to be a fellow student, Todd. Todd immediately is clearly a decent guy. Hot, but we know he's non-threatening because he's the school woodchuck mascot. When Todd drives Olive home, we find out that these two had crushes on each other in middle school. Todd doesn't believe the rumors about Olive because when they were young, she lied and said that she and Todd had kissed to cover for him because he was too scared to kiss her. There's a hint that the two of them could date, but Olive is a mess right now, so demurs. At this point, Olive feels wildly out of control. She's been accused of giving people chlamydia. The campus Christian group is trying to get her to drop out of school. Her best friend Rhiannon has stopped speaking to her, and none of the nerds she's helped are standing up for her. After a conversation with her mother about embracing who she is and telling the truth, Olive decides to do a sexy burlesque-style dance at the pep rally with Todd as backup, announcing that everyone should watch her live webcam blog that night when she'll come clean about everything. In her vlog, she also reveals that the rumor about her giving Amanda Bynes' boyfriend chlamydia isn't true. The super Christian / pro-abstinence boyfriend was actually having an affair with married guidance counselor Lisa Kudrow. Lisa Kudrow is married to Olive's favorite English teacher, Thomas Hayden Church. Olive is sorry to hurt her teacher, but the truth must come out. Now that everyone knows what's true, Olive is a virgin, slut-shaming is bad. Olive looks out her window and sees Todd pulling up on a lawnmower. She tells the world.
That's Todd. Not that I owe you guys any more confessions, but I really like this guy. And I might even lose my virginity to him. I don't know when it'll happen. You know, it might be 5 minutes from now, or tonight, or 6 months from now, or maybe on our wedding night. But the really amazing thing is, it is nobody's goddamn business.
She goes and kisses Todd, and they ride off into the sunset. There are several threats in Easy A to Olive's happiness. Her friends, social media, just how hard it is to be a teenage girl. But the real villain at the center of this story is an evangelical Christian Mean Girls style group led by Amanda Bynes that was very of the moment in 2010. Here is cultural critic Hope Rehack on why it is possible that this would be a compelling villain at the time of the film's release.
Even though that's 2 years into the Obama administration, that means it's 2 years into the corrective moment. So Bush's 2000 to 2008, and then Obama wins in 2008 and ascends in January 2009 and for the next 8 years. And I think that there is not an overcorrection, but the pendulum of time swings back and forth. And so Easy A, to me, is a response to the culture that was being forced into the minds and souls of American teens during the Bush era, which was Puritan culture, abstinence only, even in a public school. I went to public school in an inner city, and I still we were forced to receive 1 unit of abstinence education alongside our units of contraception because the Bush administration was giving extra money to public schools that did that. And you had to be a school with enough means, a public school with enough means, if you wanted to refuse that it wouldn't make a huge difference. And that means that a lot of people of middle class, working class, and poor backgrounds were force-fed abstinence.
Of the movies we are watching as part of this mini oeuvre of classic literature set in high school, Easy A is the loosest in terms of its faithfulness to the original text. But The Scarlet Letter is still central to what the film is trying to say. We haven't come as far as you might think. Even in liberal Ojai, California, a girl is still going to be slut-shamed while the man won't be, due to puritanical ideals that punish women and reward men for sexual exploits. And this was a message that clearly resonated. Easy A was a huge success financially at the time. Today, it holds up as fun and funny with a strong female lead, and its voice is singular in many ways. One of the ways that it's truly different from most high school movies is the parents in the film, and actually the adults in the film in general. In Clueless, we have a single dad whose daughter takes care of him. In Cruel Intentions, there are no parents to speak of. In She's the Man, the parents are off-screen and only shrill about having to wear dresses. In 10 Things I Hate About You, we again have a single dad who's an obstacle, not a help. And yet in Easy A, we have adults who are really modeling what good romantic relationships look like, a unique feature in a high school film. Here is Professor Tim Sherry on how adults are represented in Easy A.
You've got two very cool parents, played by Stanley Tucci and Patricia Clarkson, who are so understanding and so open-minded and down to earth. They're on her side, which is nice, because in the John Hughes movies of the 80s, the parents were always evil, of course. They were always absent. They were even worse. But the two teachers, Thomas Hayden Church and Lisa Kudrow, the Griffiths are this couple at the school, and she's a guidance counselor, and she's supposed to have the trust of the students, and he's a cool teacher, and yet she's sleeping with one of the students. And that is not only illegal and highly morally problematic, but again, the consequence is it's going to break up her marriage. It shames her husband. In a rare move for a teen movie, we see we see adults face the consequences of their immorality, at least Mrs. Griffiths.
And these two couples that Olive sees represent the kind of relationship that she wants to aspire to and the kind of relationship that she wants to avoid. One is loving and built on trust. The other is hypocritical and is built on lies. It must be noted that the marriage that falls apart in this film continues with the theme of the Scarlet Letter. We think that this guidance counselor and teacher are happily married, but it turns out that the woman's promiscuity is the threat to the marriage, and boy, does she get punished. Chlamydia, getting fired, and losing her husband. So although this movie holds up great, it is still very much of its time. If Olive actually was having sex with all of these boys, the movie implies that promiscuous women do it for bad reasons and deserve to be punished harshly. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered. You're already shaking your head because you are so stymied by the charm of Emma Stone that we don't have anything to say.
I feel like I could just yell about how much I love Emma Stone and her weird physicality, the way that she runs in high heels in this movie.
Yeah.
She's got like a clown energy that
Yes.
I find wonderful, that I think we see paid off in her more recent career choices. Like, she's moved in a big sort of surrealist, clownish direction as an actor, but we see so much of that.
Totally.
I'm obsessed with the scene where she has that bad date at the Lobster Shack.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she's just making these wild, elastic-faced expressions, and I love how committed she is to, like, contorting her body and face in the pursuit of comedy. It's really working for me.
I am really interested in this because we have found ourselves now a couple of times watching movies and discussing them when the movies are labeled as rom-coms, even though the central plot is not romantic.
Yeah.
And I'm just realizing, we say rom-com if there is a kiss and a female lead.
Yeah.
This is labeled, right? Like, if you Google it, it is labeled as a rom-com. And
Yeah.
it is not a rom-com. This is a comedy. And I don't want to act like I'm insulted because it's called a rom-com, because calling something a rom-com is not an insult, because I want to elevate what people think of as a rom-com.
Yes, and at the same time, recognizing that rom-com is a profoundly gendered category that is applied to comedies starring women. Comedies starring men also often have some kind of romantic storyline,
Yeah.
but they are not called rom-coms because romance is not figured as the center of men's lives in the same way it is, like, culturally figured as the center of women's lives.
Yes.
And that is, fraught territory because instinctively getting outraged by that, you're right, implies that there's something wrong with the genre of romance, which there really isn't.
There really isn't.
And also, it's like chick lit.
Right.
And by that, I mean, chick lit was a term that was developed to talk about commercial fiction for women that doesn't have an equivalent version for men. There's a sort of ghettoizing function to the gendering of media in this way that, like, I think it's reasonable to notice it and to ask questions about, like, why a movie like this is called a rom-com instead of a com with some rom.
Or like a raunchy comedy or a sex comedy, right? Which they're just like, it's all of those things a lot more than it's a rom-com. I'm just grateful that it's been sort of ghettoized in this way because we get to talk about it on our podcast. And it's such a great movie and like a genuinely complex, interesting text, right? That's like taking risks. It is not a movie for everyone. It is an incredibly progressive film, right? Like, its politics aren't perfect, as nobody's politics are perfect, but we've got like adults talking about sex, permissive parenting, where the parents that are super permissive are, I would argue, the heroes of the movie, right? Like,
it's a very sex positive movie that is also a like raunchy sex comedy about a teenage girl. And that is not a thing we see much.
Yes. And it's sex positive with the virgin at the center, but the virgin is a non-judgmental virgin where there is a Christian evangelical judgmental virgin, right? Like, it's even diverse representation of virgins.
At last.
We've all been waiting for.
Okay. All right. I feel like you and I could just freeform about this movie for several hours, but I do think, you know, it's a sex comedy. It's a nod to 80s comedies. It's kind of an adaptation of The Scarlet Letter. There's a lot going on here.
It's a faithful adaptation of Huckleberry Finn.
It's a word-for-word Huck Finn adaptation. So why don't we get into talking about what this movie has to say about love?
I think that this movie is about family love first and foremost. I'm excited to talk more about friendship in this movie, but because the romance is such a minor part, I think that where you see love the most is just sort of in this kitchen and in this living room and in the way that her parents feel comfortable going in and out of Olive's room, right? I think that that is where we see love and the romantic love that we see most clearly in this movie. And I do want to talk about Olive's relationship with the woodchuck. But the most romantic relationship I think we see is between the parents, played by Patricia Clarkson and Stanley Tucci.
God, I love them in this movie so much.
They are so good. And I just have to quote this like micro moment where they are picking which movie to watch as a family. Mm-hmm. And apparently this is a weekly ritual.
Yeah. The Other Boleyn Girl or The Bucket List. Two movies that their young son will definitely enjoy.
And the Tooch is the one who gets to choose. And Olive is complaining. And Patricia Clarkson is like, family member of the week gets to choose. And she's like, Dad is family member of the week every week.
Every week.
And she's like, and that's because you get to choose, Mom. And the fact that the mom chooses her husband as family member of the week every week might be the most romantic thing I've ever heard in my life. She clearly loves her children. This is a good mom.
Yeah.
And she just chooses her husband as family member of the week every week.
Yeah. I love the relationship we see between the parents, which is fun and silly and loving and accepting of each other and of their children, and the degree to which they can be loving and accepting of their children exactly as they are clearly emerges from the degree to which they are loving and accepting of one another exactly as they are. Both of them make a bunch of references to previous relationships, queer relationships. At one point, Stanley Tucci, who I'm sure has a name, but who I will only refer to as Stanley Tucci.
Who cares?
Says to Olive,
Yeah.
I was gay once for a while. Which is so funny. And
I also just keep laughing thinking about his reaction to when their black son says, I was adopted. And he goes, you were what? Who told him? The love at the heart of this movie is just fun, right? Like it's
so
just full
fun.
of joy.
And it really gives a sense that like all of the messing up and the making like weird, bad life choices that Olive is doing, all of that happens within the context of a deeply loving home where her behavior is not being policed or hyper restricted, where her parents are not worried. They're not like freaking out at the possibility that she's having sex. They're not freaking out at the possibility or at the knowledge that like there's things going on at school that seem to be stressing her out. You know, their attitude is very much like, we were young and made mistakes, and those mistakes made us who we are and brought us to this point in our lives. So you also can be young and make mistakes, and we will love you unconditionally. And that is really the foundation for all the other kinds of love that emerge in the movie. Is like it comes out of the foundation of this like really beautiful household.
And I do think that the romantic relationship that we see between Olive and, I'm just going to call him the Woodchuck.
Woodchuck Todd.
Woodchuck Todd.
I like calling him Todd because I think this is good Todd representation.
Okay. I'll come with you on that.
Todds are often sleazy.
Yeah.
But I know some good Todds, and I like to see a good Todd represented on screen.
So I'll meet you in the middle and call him Woodchuck Todd.
Thank you. That's what he is in the credits.
The romantic relationship between Olive and Woodchuck Todd. Like the initial meet cute, which we get in flashback, is that they were 12 or so and were like at a party and sort of sent into a room to kiss. And he says, I'm not ready. And she's like, that's fine. And takes it really well. And they like are chill and nice to each other anyway, right? Like she really wanted to kiss him. She's a little disappointed, but she's fine with it. He's kind of embarrassed that he's not ready to kiss her, but she's fine with that. And that is a foundation of the relationship that we hope that they have, is one of like, I'm going to wait for you until you're ready. And I'm here and I'm game and I'm nice. Like that does seem represented by Patricia Clarkson and Stanley Tucci's marriage.
Yeah, 100%. A real like, I'm going to meet you where you're at.
Yeah.
And we're just going to focus on having fun and being nice to each other.
Yeah. And I think like joking around is a strategy that the Pendergast family uses. Like we see this, there's this very small scene where Olive has been sent to detention because she called this evangelical Christian girl a twat. And she is paired up with Brandon in detention. And the heart of Brandon's story is really serious. He is being severely bullied for being gay at his school.
He's getting hate crimed at school, and the principal is a homophobe and is not willing to do anything about it.
Not only not willing to do anything about it, is like kind of like encouraging of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Punishing him for standing up for himself.
Like he's scared. He's in a scary situation and he is scared in it. And we're allowed to see, even within this comedy, like we are allowed to see the realness of that come through.
Yeah. He even tears up, right? Where he's like, please don't tell me that this is going to get better. I know it's going to get better. But he doesn't quite say this. But like, in the meantime, I'm scared I'm not going to survive this, right? Like this is really atrocious. And Olive is not making fun of him, is not making light of him, but she jokes around with him about it, right? Yeah. Where she's like, yeah, the principal is a fascist. And it's just this like very not like white girl savior, like, I'll help you. We can become friends and that'll make everything better. She just bonds with him through joking around and sort of disarms him by joking around with him. Yeah. And then he feels comfortable asking her for a complicated favor that gets sort of the main plot of the movie going.
Yeah.
But joking around is seen as like a truly loving reaching out to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't there a scene where Olive's mom comments on the fact that Olive is able to like maintain a sense of humor
Yes.
about things, and that is part of how she will survive the fact that like high school kind of sucks. Like it's hard being a teenager. Growing up, you know, this is like a coming of age comedy in part as well. And her parents know that growing up is really hard and that maintaining a sense of humor about it is one of the best ways to navigate it, is like kind of the argument that the parents are making, that, and that I think in a way that the movie as a whole is making as well. And part of that is recognizing that like there are aspects of what is happening to you in high school that could be very serious, that could be dangerous, but most of it is pretty silly. Like most of the stuff that feels right now like it is world ending is not going to be anything in 10 years.
Yeah.
And so being able to keep a sense of humor about what is happening to you, even as you're going through something that is like kind of awful, it becomes a like real and useful strategy for navigating all kinds of things, including purity culture and misogyny and the gendered violence that she is facing, the slut shaming that she is navigating. There's like this real connection between love and humor, that like when you love people, you can laugh about things with them. And when you can laugh about things with people, it is easier to love them.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, subtext. Hannah.
Yeah, let's get into the subtext. You know, it's a tricky movie to talk about, like, what does it believe and not know it believes, because it's a, like, really self-aware movie. Like, it's quite meta and self-referential. So, like, a lot of what it is doing as it thinks about love, it is doing kind of out loud and on purpose. But I do think there are a couple of interesting subtexts that are worth digging into. And one of them for me is the movie's stance on marriage, right? So this primary, as you argued, like kind of the emotional center of the movie is the marriage of her parents. The scene where she briefly bonds with Amanda Bynes' character, Marianne, is because Marianne's boyfriend's parents are getting divorced, and Marianne is really upset about that. And Olive like genuinely stops to comfort her.
Yeah.
But above all of that is the, for me, kind of odd part of the voiceover where Olive says that the one thing that she truly regrets is that she ended a marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And the way in which she ended a marriage is that she finds out that the guidance counselor, Mrs. Griffith, played brilliantly by Lisa Kudrow, has been sleeping with a student. In fact, with Marianne's boyfriend, the aforementioned boyfriend whose parents are getting divorced. And Mrs. Griffith's husband, Mr. Griffith, is Olive's favorite teacher. And, you know, in a moment of overwhelm, like having just been essentially told by Mrs. Griffith that she won't help Olive clear up her reputation because she wants Olive to take the fall for her, specifically for giving this 20-year-old high school student chlamydia.
Right.
Olive goes and tells Mr. Griffith that his wife is having an affair. And that is like driven home by the voiceover as being the one really bad thing that she did.
Yeah.
The one really harmful thing she did, the one thing that she deeply regrets. She ended a marriage. And that seems to be something that the movie believes. Like that we're not really sort of given much material through which to distance ourselves from that perspective, or like get the impression that that's something she thinks because she's young and overwhelmed, but actually that's not fair. Like that's just kind of left there. And I think it's kind of a wild claim because, like, she didn't end that marriage.
Right.
Like, this is profoundly not on her. This marriage was gonna be over at some point because this woman is sleeping with a student
Yeah.
and then bullied another student into lying and saying that she had given him chlamydia. Like, it's absolutely unbelievably unethical behavior. So that strikes me as odd and makes me wonder how marriage is being figured in the movie as like truly an untouchable institution.
I will just say, Olive says that, but she also says, and I'm really sorry for the way that I told you. So it seems as though Olive is ambivalent about the fact that she told Mr. Griffiths, her favorite teacher, that his wife was cheating on him in this horrible way. And that what she regrets is not thinking about the way that she was going to tell him and only thinking about herself and not how the information would impact him, which I do think is a very teenage thing to do that we hope we outgrow after we're teenagers, but we don't, right? Is only thinking about the way certain information impacts you and not worrying about the way that you're going to deliver that information and the way that it's impacting that person.
She told Mr. Griffiths because she wanted Mrs. Griffiths to get in trouble.
Right. And she comes into his office with no gentility, no thought. She just busts in and is like, I want you to know that your wife is cheating on you with a 20-year-old, right? And so it's possible that that tones it down just to like super respecting marriage, right? That like, if you're going to give someone information about their marriage, you need to do it very carefully. And therefore having reverence for marriage, but not necessarily a total purity mindset about it.
Yeah, I mean, the reverence for marriage is still a subtext that I find interesting. Having personally no investment in marriage as a sort of state-sanctioned institution, I find it interesting that this raunchy teen sex comedy has reverence for marriage.
To me, the subtext that this movie has that I do find truly, like, almost upsetting is this movie does not believe in female friendship in a way that, like, borders on misogynistic to me. And, like, stories can be specific. And so this can be a specific story about Olive and her best friend Rihanna and how they don't have a great friendship. And that doesn't mean that the movie writ large does not believe in female friendship. However, we don't see any female friendships in this high school movie. And the whole movie, the whole shtick of the movie is that for various reasons, Olive starts pretending like she is more sexual than she is, that she's more sexually active than she is. But it all starts because Olive doesn't want to go camping with Ree and her family, right?
Yeah.
And she doesn't want to go camping with Ree and her family in part because her parents are nudists and she doesn't want to hang around with that. And that's valid. And so she tells Ree this like kind of white lie of, I have a date, I can't go, in order to not insult Ree's family. And then Ree doesn't believe Olive that Olive didn't have sex with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And like, that's it. And Olive is just like, no, I really didn't. No, I really didn't. Fine. Is it easier for you to believe this? Then fine.
Yeah.
And then Ree gets more and more worked up against Olive based on this like very strange miscommunication where Ree just refuses to hear Olive. Like, I don't know. It's the only teen movie we've seen where there's like no friendships at the heart of this.
I mean, there are friendships. They're just bad. They're all bad.
Right.
So Olive has Rhiannon, who is mean to her. And I don't think that that is an unrealistic representation of an intense high school best friend relationship. I think sometimes those friendships can be intense to the point of cruelty. I think that's often where young women are like working out, like it's a safe space to work out a lot of stuff. And that can manifest cruelly because it's the space where a ton of emotional growing up is happening. And if we saw any other female friendships that weren't toxic like this, I'd be like, okay, well, this is just the friendship. Like Olive is very accommodating and very chill. So I like kind of get her being in a friendship with somebody who like kind of steps all over her. But then we've also got Marianne's best friendship with Nina, another one of the evangelical girls that is really positioned as like so like shallow and not genuine. And then kind of most bafflingly, the one day where Olive and Marianne become best friends.
Yes. And Olive seems genuinely glad to be best friends with Marianne for the day.
Because Marianne's nice to her and Olive's best friend is mean to her.
So, right, the context in the movie is that Olive is in the middle of this performing Hester Prynne at school moment, right? She is making money. She's getting gift cards from guys so that these guys can say to people, she let me feel her breasts, whatever. Yeah. And because these rumors are spreading, she's like, fine, if you guys are all going to slut shame me, I'm going to lean into it. And Marianne, right, like the more that Olive behaves like this, the more upset Marianne gets, right? And she's leading her prayer circles for Olive and is saying that Olive is going to go to hell.
Yeah, and then Olive finds Marianne crying.
Yeah, about a divorce, to your point earlier. And then they're nice to each other for a day, even though they have totally different values. And like, this is the only moment of healthy friendship that we see in this movie. And it's like kind of based on, I mean, it's based on them being kind to each other. But these are obviously two people who are not going to survive as friends.
I don't know if I would call it healthy friendship. I mean, they're
nice.
It's a performance of a kind of enthusiastic female friendship. But that is definitely just a performance. And Olive enjoys the performance in part because her best friend is very mean to her, and in part because she is currently in the process of becoming the school pariah, and like everybody's being weird towards her. And so it's just nice to have somebody be nice to her for a day. But this is for me a real like, this was written and directed by men kind of aspect of this movie, because as a film, it doesn't have any respect for the seriousness of female friendship. And that feels like a thing that very few women writers would do, is like to treat these relationships as so throwaway.
And I just don't even know what's at the center of Rhiannon and Olive's friendship.
Time.
Okay. Yeah.
They've been friends their whole lives. They live in a small place. They've been going to the same school forever. They're friends because they've always been friends. Yeah. So we've mentioned this a few times, but Marianne's character is very, central. Marianne as a character is very central in this movie. Another brilliant comic performance by Amanda Bynes, who I continue to think is brilliant. And she is the object of a lot of the movie's humor, as are her friends, who are all like hypocritical evangelical Christians. And I'm curious, that honestly is a thing that watching it, I was like, yeah, of course, no problem. But I'm wondering about your read on this, like the treatment of religion in this movie.
Yeah, no, I love that this is a movie that actually takes on the hypocrisy of evangelical Christians with the line, I know Jesus says that we should be nice to the whores and the homosexuals, but it's just so hard because they keep doing it. And directly saying, if you do a close reading of the Bible, Jesus is actually saying the opposite of what you all are advocating for, I think is a really important thing to be bringing up. I do think culturally in this moment, it was happening more than it had been previously. Bill Maher made his, in my opinion, ill-advised documentary about atheism a couple of years before this. The documentary film Jesus Camp is right before this, right? Like Jon Stewart is doing The Daily Show and making fun of evangelical Christians at the time. So it was a little bit more in the liberal mainstream to be taking this on.
Yeah.
But we've really dropped the mantle on this culturally over the last 15 years, and I think entirely to our detriment. So yeah, I'm just like pro this. This movie is avoiding butts of jokes that I think we see a lot of in other teenage rom-coms, right? A lot of teenage rom-coms reify making fun of vulnerable people. Like, they will be making the fat jokes rather than saying, look, it's really hard to be fat in high school, which this movie argues. And instead, this movie is actually taking on a constituency that has a ton of power, which is the evangelical church. And I just think it's awesome.
And I think it's really central to the work that this movie is doing as an adaptation. So maybe should we talk about our theme, high school movie adaptations?
Let's do it.
So this has got to be the most obscure of the adaptations that we've talked about, because it's been Austen and Shakespeare so far. And I feel like The Scarlet Letter is maybe like, yeah, they're reading it in high school in this movie, but like, I don't know how many people are reading The Scarlet Letter in high school. Do you do that in the States?
Oh, no. I don't know if they do it anymore, but in the 11th grade, we read it in American literature.
Ooh. Wow. So many people, so many other American writers talk about this as being like the first great work of American literature, the first truly American novel that truly captures the American spirit. And I'm like, weird.
Yeah.
I mean, Canlit also weirder, I would argue. But this book, for folks who haven't read, real weird. But it is about the Puritans and about judgment, particularly the judgment of women for their sexual behavior, the way that that judgment is leveled unevenly. So like women are more policed in their sexual behavior than men. And it is a book about sort of hypocrisy and the space between what God actually wants and how people practice religion, right? Like what it actually means to sin versus how people are judged by their communities. So the evangelicals have this really important role because they represent that sort of puritanical, hypocritical component of society that is profoundly judging a woman for her behavior while failing to consider the like subtleties and nuances of what she is doing and the like perhaps less obvious or less culturally dictated morality of her actions.
Yeah.
Right? Because like it's really important that Olive is being judged while actually doing something very virtuous. It would be a different movie if she was just having a ton of sex and navigating being judged for it. But she's not. She's letting boys lie about having had sex with her or, you know, gotten to second base in order to make their lives easier.
Yeah. It's also one of the things that I love about this adaptation is that I think it highlights one of the things that we've talked about with high school, which is that high school is now one of the last places where there's this like public square, small town feeling outside of, I would imagine, very small towns, which I live in a medium small town. But Hester in the novel, right, like everybody knows that she has done this. Like she cannot walk down the street. She can't shop, right? Like she can't get groceries without having to confront this. And I think most of us, because of cars, if you feel like a pariah in your town, you can go grocery shopping at the next town. Whereas Hester is completely bathing in this judgment. And high school is one of the only places where that is still true. I think social media is actually a place where that can feel very true.
Yeah.
But right, high school is like a public square where you can't, it's really hard to just transfer schools. You can't just go to the grocery store in the next town. You are in high school and you are ridiculed and looked upon and watched in the same way, in an almost like 19th century puritanical way.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's something we've talked about with all of these adaptations is that this sort of adapting of classical works of literature into high school makes sense because high school is a space that reproduces these like really intense concentrated social spheres, like the small town in Emma, like the court in Twelfth Night, like the puritanical small town in The Scarlet Letter. That like those are social spaces that don't exist for the most part or in the same way. in like contemporary North American culture. And so high school becomes this place where like we can see those dynamics playing out, you know, these dynamics of judgment and the way that rumor circulates and the way that you can't escape the gaze of those who are around you. And, you know, as per what Marianne says, you can't escape the gaze in other ways as well.
And even though our world is not as restrictive in many ways, it doesn't mean that these feelings aren't the same, right? Even though it's not true that you're not going to be able to rise above your station, literally, you can't become Duke Orsino. It's still functionally true that you can't rise above your station, right? That the middle class is disappearing and that it's impossible to buy a house, right? Like, it is sure as hell it might not be written law, but...
Yeah. And it certainly is true of the experience of being a teenager, which I think in general is like something that YA is good at getting at, is like there is a heightened emotional intensity to being a teenager that allows for, even in a sort of contemporary realist mode, for these like larger than life feelings and interactions that are like, it feels like the world is ending. It might not be, but it really does feel like it. And it also lets you take something like The Scarlet Letter and make it feel a little bit lower stakes, because this isn't going to be the rest of her life. She's not going to die and have a scarlet letter on her freaking tombstone. She's going to get out of high school pretty soon. But in the meantime, emotionally, it feels comparable.
And she's going to be able to get through it with humor, right? Which is the other adaptation moments that we see in the film. There's a moment at the very beginning of the movie where she is dancing in the shower and she does her hair in the shower with soap in this way that makes her look like, I don't know, like a dinosaur, right? Of some kind. She gives herself a little mohawk. And I was like, oh my God, that's just like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then later in the movie, she's playing the guitar and her mom comes in and goes, that sounds great. And she goes, never had one lesson, which is a direct line from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And I was like, oh, they're doing this on purpose. And then there's a full-on montage, 2/3 of the way through the movie where it's like, I don't want to be in love. I want to be in love like 80s movies, right? I want John Cusack holding the boombox above his head. I want Patrick Dempsey in Can't Buy Me Love. And I want a major musical number like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And she does a musical number. Does. So this movie is adapting The Scarlet Letter, but it's integrating other adaptation moments as well.
For sure. It's really cool to see the way that, like, by the 2010s, there's such a rich and well-established canon of high school romances that the movie can be adapting those as well, or like really incorporating them as intertext. Like there's a whole cinematic vocabulary that can be drawn on really explicitly, and that you can kind of be like, my audience is going to get what some of these references are. It's part of the self-referentiality of the movie, right? That it's adapting The Scarlet Letter. And also at one point she says in the voiceover, isn't it funny how when you're reading a book in high school, suddenly all of your little teen dramas seem to be matching up to the book? Like she's really explicitly talking about this being a Scarlet Letter adaptation. In fact, because she's reading The Scarlet Letter in class, she begins to perform, like she is turning her life into an adaptation of The Scarlet Letter intentionally. She's like intertextual on purpose. And we can assume that like when she says that line to her mom, she's making a reference to Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But one of the things that this like self-referentiality is doing is, I think, playfully introducing the question of what stories we do and don't adapt, what stories we do or do not treat as being relevant to our contemporary lives or universal enough to be adaptable. You know, that like Shakespeare and Austen get adapted over and over and over again and are treated as though they can just sort of be brought into the present with minimal work. But The Scarlet Letter is a weird choice. And so being really self-conscious about adaptation and recognizing how the movie itself is like operating through a series of tropes like 80s movies, all sort of really self-consciously invites us to think about the work of adaptation and about the stories that we choose to adapt.
Just a little bit of trivia on this film. The screenwriter, Burt Royal, actually wanted 3 movie adaptations to all take place at this high school and have like Olive become a minor character in other adaptations. And the other 2 he was going to do were, interestingly, Cyrano de Bergerac, which does get retold over and over and over again. And then a Dickens novel that I had never heard of called The Mystery of Edwin Drood.
What's Mr. Dickens?
So I really love, using a setting in multiple movies and having characters be characters in each other's, right? Something you see a lot in romance novels. And
I would love an easy A cinematic universe.
Exactly.
Okay. I know we've talked about the Scarlet Letter already, but I actually want to hit the emergency stop button and talk about the Scarlet Letter a bit more.
Amazing. I can't wait.
Vanessa, how familiar are you with Nathaniel Hawthorne's writings on the genre of the romance?
Can I tell you everything that I think I know about Nathaniel Hawthorne?
Can.
He said something like women, scribbling women. He did not think women could write. Herman Melville was in love with him, and it was unrequited.
Aww.
And he lived next door to the Alcott family. And he was so annoying that they would go the other direction and walk literally 2 miles out of their way to not have to pass his house so they didn't have to talk to him. And that, I think, is everything that I know about Nathaniel Hawthorne, other than the fact that he read the Scarlet Letter and has,
Well, you're about to learn a little bit more that has absolutely nothing to do with his personality and a lot more to do with the historical definition of the romance as a genre.
Amazing.
So I'm going to read you a brief excerpt from Nathaniel Hawthorne's 1851 preface to The House of the Seven Gables.
Can't wait.
Quote, "When a writer calls his work a romance, it need hardly be observed that he wishes to claim a certain latitude, both as to its fashion and material, which he would not have felt himself entitled to assume had he professed to be writing a novel." The latter form of composition, the novel, is presumed to aim at a very minute fidelity, not merely to the possible, but to the probable and ordinary course of man's experience. Realism. The former, the romance, while as a work of art, it must rigidly subject itself to laws, and while it sins unpardonably so far as it may swerve aside from the truth of the human heart, has fairly a right to present that truth under circumstances to a great extent of the writer's own choosing or creation. Are we following this? It doesn't need to be as realistic. If he think fit, also, he may so manage his atmospherical medium as to bring out or mellow the lights and deepen and enrich the shadows of the picture. He will be wise, no doubt, to make a very moderate use of the privileges here stated, and especially to mingle the marvelous rather as a slight, delicate, and evanescent flavor than as any portion of the actual substance of the dish offered to the public. He can hardly be said, however, to commit a literary crime, even if he disregard this caution. End quote. What's really key here is that Nathaniel Hawthorne called The Scarlet Letter a romance. When he is talking about romance, it has nothing to do with it being a love story. That's completely unrelated to his definition of the genre. He is talking about the romance as a genre that adheres less strictly to realism than the novel does, and that makes space for the supernatural in order to emphasize emotional and spiritual themes.
Yeah.
And early American literary critics essentially argued that the reason why The Scarlet Letter was like the great early work of American literature was because there wasn't enough stuff happening in the US for realism.
He died in 1864 during the Civil War.
Yeah. So Lionel Trilling, major early 20th century literary critic, said that the romance was the distinctive form of early American literature because the British realist novel was ill-suited to the social thinness of early American life.
Sure. Also, Nathaniel Hawthorne's, I think, great-great-grandfather was one of the judges in the Salem witch trials. So again, lots happening.
Socially thin.
His definition of romance is how I think about and defend musical theater, right? That this heightened thing, this heightened tool that you can use, which is non-realism, which is just people breaking out into song, right, is cathartic and is truer than truth. Then there's something operatic, heightened, and therefore cathartic about watching your big feelings have actual representation of the sky opening up and rain falling when you're sad, because that's what it feels like. And so, yeah, I disagree with the justification for this argument, but I find the argument compelling.
And I think that is really an apropos comparison you're making, Vanessa, because it's really interesting to see how this rom-com is, in fact, more connected to Nathaniel Hawthorne's definition of romance than it is to our contemporary definition of romance. Because
to our podcast's definition of romance. So we are so meta. We are doing a Hawthornian episode of a romance comedy podcast.
Which is why it incorporates a gratuitous musical number. And, there are so many elements of this movie that are pushing against the demands of realism, that are not concerned with the demands of realism because it wants to do something that is emotionally true.
Which is something that I love in art. I mean, this is, you and I can talk about this for hours. Yeah. Les Mis, better than any documentary, right?
Just
truer.
Actually, not sure if I'm comfortable with that.
Truer than any history book. Emotional resonance, Hannah. I will say my one complaint about this movie is that I hate the way that the musical number is filmed. It so wants you to know that it's a joke that it doesn't take its own musical number seriously. She is never filmed head on. She's an amazing dancer. She's incredible with her body. It does not show it off. It is all from this weird angle where it is not taking the musical number seriously. And everybody knows that makes bad comedy, right? You have to take the act of the comedy seriously in order for the humor to work.
Yeah.
And I feel like that musical number is filmed so poorly and you can't hear her well. And I just think that it does not have the courage of its convictions with how it's done.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's staying very sort of tongue-in-cheek and self-referential in that scene.
Yeah.
It doesn't give its own joke enough room to breathe because it's too busy being we're winking, do you get it?
It's a joke. And I'm I get it. Can you just show me the musical number now? I promise to think it's funny. I promise.
Anyway, I was delighted to do a little investigating of how Nathaniel Hawthorne defined the romance and realized that this is a rom-com in a distinctly 18th century mode.
Can I just say, though, Hannah, before we move on, about Nathaniel Hawthorne and my just gossip about him, I found the quote of what he actually said about female writers.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
And what he said, I just want everybody to hate him as much as I do. What he said is, America is now wholly given over to a damned mob of scribbling women.
The dream.
And that was him writing about his neighbor, Louisa May Alcott. I should have no chance of success while the public taste is occupied with their trash.
Oh my gosh.
And should be ashamed of myself if I did succeed.
Yeah. You know who didn't think that American life was too socially thin to write a novel about it? It's Louisa May Alcott.
Scribbling women. Emily Dickinson, who was America has bumblebees. I don't know.
Okay.
Let's talk about that.
Okay, Vanessa. Would you please finish the sentence for me? You should watch this movie if.
you believe that Can't Buy Me Love is an underrated gem of a 1980s rom-com, but you're afraid to rewatch it because you're worried it won't hold up, which is where I am. And I'm like, homage to it in this good movie fills me up with like, Can't Buy Me Love. But I don't actually have to rewatch Can't Buy Me Love. Hannah, what about you? You should watch this movie if
you want to experience intense vicarious parent envy. I want to be raised by Stanley Tucci and Patricia Clarkson so bad.
Next week, Hannah, we're going to be watching the final scene, which is the homage to Can't Buy Me Love. And if you want to hear us talk about a bonus scene, you can sign up for our Patreon. Hannah and I spent some time today talking about how religion is depicted in this film. And it is depicted in a very 2010 way. Like, these characters did not exist in the 90s in this way, and they don't exist now in this way. And so we wanted to understand why in 2010 there was this Amanda Bynes type character sort of happening across a lot of movies. So we are going to speak to Professor Megan Hunt. Megan Hunt is a professor in the Department of History, Classics, and Archaeology at the University of Edinburgh. She is the author of Southern by the Grace of God, Religion, Race, and Civil Rights in Hollywood's American South. Let's get Megan on the phone. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Vanessa. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for coming on the phone to talk to us about this, I think, fascinating topic. I'm very jealous of your career. So in the early 2000s, there does seem to be like a tone for how evangelicalism is talked about, or at least a new interest in it. And I'm thinking about But I'm a Cheerleader, the documentary Jesus Camp, Saved, and then, of course, Easy A, where evangelicalism is seen as distinct culturally and something to be reckoned with both seriously and to be mocked. And I'm wondering what's going on at the time that there does. First of all, am I correct that this is a moment where evangelicalism is being sort of approached artistically differently? Or was I just like in my teens and 20s and so paying attention for the first time? And if so, what was going on that this tone shifted?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I've come across in my research is the idea that being incredibly derogatory or mocking of evangelical Christians in particular is almost like the last acceptable form of bigotry, that this is like the last remaining community that it's totally acceptable in kind of dominant media to just completely lampoon. I do think that there's probably something to be said there about the Bush administration and the perception in American culture and politics, but also more broadly, I think, thinking internationally, that the United States was led by people who were predominantly driven by their religious identities in a way that obviously lots of Americans objected to, obviously lots of people around the world. Obviously I'm thinking particularly from a UK perspective or a broader kind of European perspective, found distinctly odd in the sense of just how blatant that religious identity was in crafting certain policies and attitudes. So I do think that will have been a factor in the period that you're talking about. And I think part of the reason then why that leans quite often into a sort of derogatory framework is that while this was a group that clearly sort of liberal media elites felt that they could mock, they are also acknowledging that this is a group that actually does have quite a lot of power in mainstream politics and society. So I think, to come back to that earlier point about this last remaining form of bigotry, it is important to remember that this is not a group that has obviously faced any of the disenfranchisement of other minority groups. So you're sort of simultaneously lampooning this group because you don't identify with them, but also because you're acknowledging, I think, the power that they do have, even if you think their ideas are fairly ridiculous. It's just satire at the end of the day, isn't it? It's kind of,
Right.
lampooning the people who have power over us, even if we think that they are a bit ridiculous, essentially. So I do think that the George W. Bush administration is probably a big factor in that. And, thinking about this particular type of evangelical Christianity that was perceived as having a lot of political power at the time, and how that then translates in particular to films about, teenagers, about sexuality, about particularly women's bodies, etc. I do think that all of those things must be connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm wondering if you can tell me some of the things that you noticed specifically about the Amanda Bynes evangelical Christian leader on this campus character in Easy A.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I noticed quite quickly is that in some respects, she doesn't quite fit the usual, at least aesthetically. She's kind of in the sort of Mean Girls vein in terms of how she dresses. She's obviously incredibly attractive. She's sort of presented in a very desirable way, at least in terms of how she's kind of physically represented. And I think that is quite different from a lot of the other characters that will have had similar representations in terms of what they represent to the narrative, but can often maybe be presented as, more naive or easily led, or just simply a character who physically we're supposed to see as maybe being a bit of an outcast. And I think what's interesting is in Easy A, the implication is that actually this is one of the more powerful groups in the school. And that even if people don't agree with their political and their religious views, they obviously have quite a significant status on campus. So in this film, I think you do get that sense that this is a group that, while many people might be kind of ridiculing them behind their back, they do have a lot of clout within the school, both in terms of their relationships with other students, but also their relationship with kind of teachers and the kind of school management,
Yeah.
So particularly the Amanda Bynes character is like, she's always there because she seems to work in the office, the school office or something. So she's kind of literally within the power structure of the school, despite being a student. And I think that really adds to the kind of inherent power that her character seems to have. So you can't just kind of disregard her in a way that I think you can in a lot of other films that use a similar type of religious character. She is quite powerful.
That is fascinating. It's like a much more apt metaphor for the way that evangelical Christianity is actually operating in America, where you can lampoon it, you can disagree with it, but you can't say that it doesn't have its tentacles in both the soft power social structures of a place, but also literally, working in the principal's office.
Yeah. She's literally, within her kind of small universe, she's within the seat of power, very, very literally. Yeah.
So interesting. I'm also just really curious because this is also the rise of like Nicholas Sparks novels being adapted into films. We are simultaneously being spoon-fed these stories about virginity, and I'm thinking of the movie Dear John, which is about like sacrificing yourself for your country, right? There are these very romantic stories being told with implicit evangelical ideals and, A Walk to Remember, quite explicit evangelical ideals. And I don't know enough about it, but these movies are being made by the same studios, right? They're at least like in the same cineplexes and the same distribution centers. So this is just capitalism. We want it all.
Well, yeah, probably. But I guess historically, evangelicals have been quite bad at communicating their priorities to outsiders, which is partially why they can kind of be the butt of the joke, is that even though they have all of this power, they've not been very good at articulating that to the wider culture. And so I think what you're describing is actually a moment where maybe that did work, because those narratives were so embedded in the kind of existing expectations and, to a certain extent, the sort of aesthetics of what teen romance films looked like at that time. And so in a way, it's like the vehicle already existed, and those ideas could kind of be placed within that vehicle, if that makes sense. Whereas, generally speaking, sort of Christian-themed cinema is actually quite important. It does exist, but it tends to have quite a deliberately selective audience. It's not really appealing. It doesn't tend to have the kind of artistic merit, at least in the eyes of kind of mainstream critics. So I guess what you're describing is, potentially a moment where, again, evangelicals had a lot of power in American society at the time, and they were actually able to channel those views into a sort of acceptable type of entertainment that people were happy to consume. And I think in a way, some of the films like Easy A that are so much more satirical in their style, as well as kind of probably making these broader comments about the power of religion in American society and why that's problematic from the perspective of the film and some of its central characters, is potentially also a bit of a pushback against a particular type of teen movie, like the ones you've described, the Nicholas Sparks kinds of films. And, it's not really our central topic for today, but one of the other themes that comes across really powerfully in Easy A is that she really wants to be in like an 80s style Hollywood film. She doesn't want to be in a kind of naughty style Hollywood film. She wants to be in like a John Hughes film. So maybe in some respects she's deliberately pushing back, or the filmmakers are pushing back against what teen movies had kind of become by that point, because a lot of the kind of heyday of the teen movie had kind of already happened, hadn't it, really, by the time Easy A comes out. Yeah.
And I just don't feel like that is being represented at all in teen movies, right? Like I'm thinking about XO Kitty and To All the Boys I've Loved Before, right? I don't see religion as coming up in representations of teens in contemporary film. What happened there? Or again, am I wrong? I'm 42 and so I'm out of touch.
I think you're right, obviously, that particular moment does seem to be quite significant, both, as we've described, both in the films that are sort of actively engaging with quite a Christian sort of mindset and those that are actively pushing against it. And so I guess maybe, there's an element of the evolutions within Hollywood where that central debate of the sort of power of evangelical Christianity, maybe for a period post the Bush administration wasn't as powerful, particularly thinking maybe within the Obama era. I think Hollywood clearly had quite different priorities. I think what's interesting in our current climate is whether or not those kind of debates will become quite central again.
Yeah.
And to some extent, how teen culture responds to those things when you have, a generation of young women who are growing up without a lot of the protections that many of our generation took for granted at that part of our lives. And they felt under threat during the Bush administration, but they kind of survived a little bit longer. Whereas how Hollywood and kind of teen culture will respond to this active period of repression is, I wonder if the severity of what we're currently facing might force Hollywood to kind of push back again in more overt ways, which, would be really interesting and potentially spawn a new wave of very satirical teen films.
Yeah. Megan, thank you so much. It's just absolutely fascinating, and I'm just really grateful to you.
Thank you. It was great.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are a small show, so we really love seeing you on Patreon saying, do you know who I am? Someone who supports independent artists. So if you want to be able to say that about yourself, join us on Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. We are a Not Sorry production. Our executive producer is me, Vanessa Zoltan. We are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman and distributed by Acast. Thanks, as always, to our soulmate level patrons, Molly Reilly, who we would chase through the airport to declare our love to, Becky Boo, who we would wait for hours on the top of the Empire State Building for, Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for, Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp, Claudia Hammerman, who we would give the whole door to float on, even if there was room for both of us, Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for, Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with, giving up antibiotics, Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class, and Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, but crazy in love with. Thanks this week to Megan Hunt, our brilliant academic, for getting on the phone with us, and to our team, Julia Argy, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, Nikki Zoltan, and Stephanie Paulsell.